What is going on, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. This is episode 174, and we have yet to come up with a title for this episode, but it's been a couple weeks, especially with me being back in the United States. So Bryan and I are just going to have a little bit of a recap episode. There's been a number of different topics that we kind of wanted to talk about, but nothing that would make for the entirety of an episode. So we're going to put a couple of them together, and here we are. We're going to skip updates since we're just going to wrap it into the episode. And I guess I can just kick it off with my USA trip. I was back in my hometown, which is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, saying goodbye to an uncle who passed actually like 2-3 days after I got home, 3 days. So I was really, I can't say I was glad. It was obviously awful, but I'm glad I opted to like come home right away instead of like delaying based off the timeline the doctors gave, because it was very, very quick. So I got to see a lot of family, which is always good, obviously under crappy circumstances. Weather was nice, which I wasn't really prepared for. It was November and it was still 75 degrees in Pennsylvania, which is just absurd from,
nice.
When I lived there. There was a new gym that opened up that I had seen, and it was full of new tech equipment, which is out of Korea. So some of that stuff was pretty cool. There was a couple pieces where I was like, this is pretty damn decent. I like this. Others, especially like some of the leg stuff where I was like, this fucking sucks. And they probably were like $5,000 a piece. But that's what you get when you buy all of your equipment from one single equipment supplier. You get the good with the bad. And I would just, home for me has always been super, super busy. Families all over the place, trying to see some of my best friends and stuff. So a very, very hectic trip, and sandwiched between 30 hours of travel on either side of it. The funny story that I'll wrap up with is there's times where enough time passes and you kind of erroneously do things that you learned not to do in the past because enough time has passed and you kind of forgot it was a bad idea. And I opted to fly into JFK, and that was a bad idea. I flew into JFK, and then I had about a 3-hour drive from JFK to my hometown. And I was like, the Newark airport's about an hour drive anyway. Like Philadelphia is about an hour drive. It's all pretty much relative. I was wrong. I land. I haven't driven a car in over 2 years. We drive in the left side of the road over here in Bali, so I haven't driven on the right side of the road in 2 years, nor driven a car. I'm in some like brand new Jeep with all the new fucking everything. I can't even figure out how to turn the radio on and stuff like that. It's been a really, really long time since I've actually like used a car I learned how to use a car's interface, and I was just getting my ass kicked on it. I'm jet lagged as shit because I land, it's 11 a.m. in New York, which is literally 12 p.m. Bali time. So I'm like super, super tired. I don't have the tolls. I don't have any cash to pay the tolls. So I have to like do the no toll option on Google Maps. And it takes me through like New York City. And I'm like, first time in a car in 2 years, jet lag.
Oh,
I'm in this brand new car. I don't know. It was a disaster. And I have a 3.5-hour drive to my hometown. And I'm fucking super tired. So that is how the trip started. But I made it. No bad things happened. But that was one of the things where I was like, what were you thinking, Aaron? This was a terrible idea.
That's that doesn't sound ideal. I was just thinking as you were talking about the tolls in Colorado, all of our tolls are cashless. And so you either have like one of those toll passes and it like, sends you you pay monthly for it or whatever, or else you just drive straight through it. And then like a week later, you receive a bill for whatever the toll was in the mail, which would have been way easier for you than having to like drive through New York. I don't even know if New York does that or not, but having cash.
I didn't even know. Like I'm in a rental car. It's the state is in the license plate's in Ohio, and I was like, So a lot, but everything worked out. I'm happy I went. I'm happy to be back home for sure. But it was a nice little trip.
Yeah. Were you close with your uncle?
Parts. Not really, but when I was younger, yeah. But the hard thing is I realistically left my hometown in 2006, when I moved away from university. I went home 2 out of my 4 summers when I was at university. And I mean, that's 18 years ago at this point. You know what I mean? So it's
Yep.
really been 18 years since I've spent considerable amount of time around like family and stuff.
Hmm.
And then obviously right after university, I moved to Southern California, and I would only go home maybe like every other year or every like 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's just a lot of time has passed. And it's not that I wouldn't say I'm not close with people, but it's really hard when you've been gone for so long.
Yeah. No, I feel that.
Yeah.
I read a stat once that you spend all this time with your parents through your developmental years until you leave the house. And then, so say 18 years or whatever that is. And then after you leave the house, apparently for the rest of life, you get a total of about 1 year of time with your family. So 365 days that you would spend over the course of the next 70 years or whatever that is. And that's kind of crazy to think about, especially from the other side, coming from it from the perspective of a parent being like, wow, I'm so inundated and almost overwhelmed by all of this childcare that I have at the moment. And yet at the end of the road, it's almost this sad, reflective feeling of, well, I've been so consumed by these kids for 18 years and now they're just like gone and I see them barely ever. So definitely a different perspective, I guess, being the visitor versus the person kind of losing the child in a sense. But always good, to come home. And I'm sure your parents were super happy to see you at that point. Can you
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about what you did gym wise while you were there? You kind of briefly touched on, this gym that you found with this equipment, but how well were you able to kind of stick to your overriding plan, as you prepare for getting on stage here in the next few months?
Yeah, to be completely honest, not well, and it's been weighing on me. Um, I'm just, I'm someone I really thrive on progress in accomplishing things and stuff. And realistically, if I'm like really being honest, I can't confidently say I've made a significant progress since before the hernia,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the first week in June, and it's the second week of November now. Um, I had a pretty good, like I started training again. I was back up to speed about middle of September, I think. And I had about like one pretty good month. I can't confidently say like how much progress was really made in that month. I was about 2-3 pounds heavier than I was in like May. I had the Malaysia trip. I lost a bunch of weight like I always do. I got back to like a pretty okay spot. I had about a week back and I left for the States. And then with, the effectively 2 days of travel on both sides. So that's like 4 days of travel. I was there for 8 days. So that's 8 + 4, 12 days. I'm now down. This morning I was 218 pounds. When in like the middle of October, I was 228.
Mm.
So it's frustrating because it's hard for me with this stuff, with like this travel and seeing people and family stuff, to eat literally 6 times per day like I need
Right.
to keep my body weight up. So things were pretty decent in the beginning, and then it was hard to stay on top of it. When I don't have as much food and especially training lower bodies, like really hard when you're on different hack squats and leg presses
Yeah.
that don't really line up well and stuff. What I try and do is I just try and replicate movements. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, my first session in there was a back session, and I had like a high to low bilateral row. And I'm like, okay, what machine is most similar to that? Great. I had a unilateral row, which was like a unilateral cable row. I was able to like rig that up on one of the machines. Great unilateral, lumbar cable row. I said the high to low. I had a low to high kind of like trap upper back focused row. I
Mm-hmm.
just set that angle up on if there was a machine for it, which they actually did have, like a chest supported kind of like a replica, not a replica, but like a model similar to like the, hammer
Hammer
strength.
strength or prime. Yeah.
Yeah, load a high
Yeah.
plate loaded row. I was able to perform that. Rear delt pec, rear delt fly
Reverse fly.
machine.
Yeah.
Yes, reverse fly. Thank you. I was like, why can't I get these words? Um, 3 sets of biceps, and
Yeah.
I was out. So that's what I always try and do, and not try to get too like
Mm.
nuanced in it. Even and I've have this question from clients sometimes. Even if I have like dumbbell pressing in, I find that performance isn't even equal to be like, okay, last week, my home gym, I did dumbbell incline press for whatever 100 pounds for like 8 reps. I find that I can't just like rock up and do 100 pounds on the incline for 8 reps. I might only get like 5 or 6. Like
Hmm.
I get a pretty decent performance degradation. Um, and it's just something that I've come to accept, right? The
Hmm.
primary trip of the goal was family oriented, and I know training progress and stuff is at a standstill, and I'm pretty much just
Yeah.
trying to hold on to what I had to the best that I can.
Yeah, that's definitely tough psychologically coming from the place where you are, where you're so performance and goal driven in general.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I know the answer to this question, but I find there to be two different kind of avatars of people that travel and work out. And one group is like super motivated and excited about the opportunity to try a new gym and be in a new environment with new people and new equipment and like all this stuff. And then you have the other side, which I think is you, which is kind of like, I'm out of my routine. I don't have my equipment. I don't really like being in this new gym, and everything that I'm doing kind of decreases my motivation to train. Do you kind of find yourself in that category?
It depends on the gym, to be completely
Yeah.
honest. Um, like for example, when we spent some time in Virginia with Jenny's family, there's a gym called RVA Iron in Richmond, Virginia.
I've heard of
It's
this. Yeah.
sick. It's such a good gym. And even so that like we would drive like an hour each way, like once a week to go to the gym, because it's
From
just
Roanoke.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like that is one. And there's the people who say like, oh, the equipment doesn't really matter, like those sorts of things, like you just train. Like they're just wrong.
Yeah.
They're just wrong. It really, really does. Like they have such good equipment in there. You can get like out of 3 sets what like the type of stimulus and pump whatever you're looking for, that it might take you like 5 or 6 sets or more
Yeah.
somewhere else, because things like the angles are so good. Resistance curves are money. They really invest in really, really well sought after equipment, and it really does make a difference in the quality of your training. It
Yeah.
can, I
No.
should say.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that even if you're not just focusing on the stimulus through the muscle that you're targeting, you also have to account for the burden on your joint structures if that exists. And when you find a machine that lines up so well that it both stimulates your target tissue and causes zero joint structure disruption, that's kind of where your money is made. And it's tough to find those machines that do both of those.
Yeah, it's like the first time I ever used a Nebula 35-degree leg press, and I was like, oh wow,
Mm-hmm.
this is literally a leg press gift from like the future aliens or something. It just
I
makes
don't think I've
perfect
tried that
sense.
one.
Like
Yeah.
you get in it, there's no pressure on your back. You can literally bring your heels right up to your butt cheeks, and it's smooth, and you're like, this is incredible. The range of motion is incredible. Like it just makes sense. It's wonderful. And then you use like another one, and then the angle of the foot plate is a little bit like, it allows your toes to be farther forward than your heels, which is
Mm,
great for range of motion. And then you use one
hmm.
of the other leg presses, like the standard ones, where it's the opposite, where your heels are farther forward than your toes,
Mm-hmm.
which puts you in more, what would that
Glute
be?
dominant position. More,
A
yeah, I
glute
mean, you're in
dominant position, but
dorsiflexion. Yeah.
no, it's not dorsiflexion. It would be plantar flexion, because it's like your toes are pulled back.
Yeah, that would be dorsiflexion. Plantar is where your
Okay,
toes point
yeah.
forward.
Sorry. But you like run out of range of motion faster because of that
Yeah.
position that it's in. Um, yeah, I'm losing my original what we wanted to talk about, but it's one of those things, like it doesn't matter until you realize that it does, and then when you try and
Hmm.
go back, you're like, this is frustrating because it can be so much better if they just manufactured this machine for people's biomechanics, you know?
Right. Well, everyone's different too, but yeah. Okay. Tell me about overselling the simplicity. What does this mean?
Yeah. So I want to make sure that I try and communicate everything through like a positive light. I've been feeling a little quite frustrated lately and I mean, potentially even a little bit negative, but I'm seeing a lot of content that people are producing. And then what in turn is it, then I get clients coming in or clients asking me things. And there's a lot of things out there. And I'm finding it more recently with people entering the space, people are doing their best, right? But making it, selling that things are a lot easier than they really are, and that you can train 2 times per week, 2 sets per muscle group, 4-5 reps from failure, do your nutrition 75-25, and build this like amazing physique. And it's just not how it works. This is someone that works hands-on with a lot of people. It just does not work that way. I wish it did. And then because it does is it leads to frustration, because then people think like I'm doing, my nutrition is pretty good 75% of the time. Another 25% I'm having like, my cheat meals and my free meals, but mostly, pretty accounted for. I train 2 to 3 times per week for about, 45 minutes, but why is like my physique not look like I want it to look? And I'm like, because you're being sold a lie, unfortunately, or an oversimplification at best, maybe not, a lie. But I think that's one thing I'm seeing, and I'm getting, people are really, what's the word I want to use here? Kind of like let down when they realize like that's just, you can be healthy, you can be not overweight or whatever, but you're not going to have this physique that you really want in that capacity, unfortunately. And then I feel like people are just getting sold that a lot recently.
So you're seeing this coming towards you where people are both being fed this like low volume, low frequency, but also low effort. Because I think that there's a fine line between like low volume and low frequency in itself, I've become to believe is not a problem if high effort is there. High volume, high frequency, also fine with lower effort. I mean, you have those 3 variables of volume, frequency, and intensity that you can kind of play with to create this kind of milieu that creates successful training. And so, yeah, I mean, lower effort combined with lower volume, lower frequency, we have a problem because all 3 of those are now low. But that's, I guess my question is, that's what you're seeing? Like people are coming to you legitimately with information that training X number of reps from failure with low volume, low frequency seems to be promoted or touted somewhere?
Yes. And the hard thing there is the low effort, right? Because it's, right, if you're someone who's realistically training 2 times per week, right? And you're doing like your full body or something like that person, and I have found in my corner of the internet and clients and stuff, that person is also not realistically training at a 2 RIR. They might think they are, but they're at like a 8 RIR, something like that. And I think,
well, that person should be training to failure. I mean, if you're training 2 times a week full body, like 2 RIR might not even cut it. So I guess like I get what you're saying. Like I agree with you. I'm curious where that approach, that methodology is coming from. Because I'm obviously biased, maybe blinded in some ways by the world that I surround myself with, both personally and in social media. But I don't see a lot of that where all 3 of those variables are all kind of on that lower spectrum, especially effort.
It's the beauty for you and I, and hopefully the listeners, is like we deal in context and nuance, right? And what you said there, like when I painted that picture and you're like, whoa, well, even a 2 RIR, like, no, that person needs to be training to failure. And I think like that is the part that's missing when it's the, I don't know what you want to call it, young professional who's now entering their first job and starting to realize they don't have as much time. The work demands are high and they want to move up the ranks. They can only train 2 times per week, and being like, guess what? You have leg press sets to failure now, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
tough sell. And actually taking leg press sets to failure is wretched, you
Mm-hmm.
know? But that's the part when people are, because what I'm seeing, especially on social media, is people are saying like, if you want to be healthy and have, not have a dad bod, and of course they're using imagery, which is someone that's probably 11% body fat on a beach who's been training for like 6 to 8 years, and they're saying all you need, is 2 times per week, three, maybe 45 minutes in the gym, 75% of your nutrition good, 25% can be your alcohol, free meals, weekends free sort of thing, and you can have this. It's just not true, and
Mm-hmm.
especially with the imagery and stuff they're using, like, yeah, if you were a lifetime athlete, you're 23 years old, you're already 11% body fat, and you just don't want to lose that, sufficient. But it's being
Mm-hmm.
sold to the person that's like 30, probably 24% body fat, already doesn't have the best eating habits. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
here's a whatever X% effort, and it's going to all this, it's going to create this physique that you dream of. And it's just a lie,
Mm-hmm.
or at best miscontextually applied, like grossly miscontextually applied. Um, and I know I get a good amount of my clientele is also coaches themselves. And I'm getting some, and the problem here is like, I'm going to have some coaches that listen to this that are my clients, like thinking I'm talking about them. Some of you, yes. Others, no. But the ones who are probably panicking are probably the ones in the no category, but they're coming in with like habits and training and telling me what they want. And I'm like, this isn't going to cut it.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes I really want to be like, you should know better at this point because you are in this profession. Um, and I think it's, what it probably comes down to is a lot of the people who are in the like coaching guru stuff and just selling people a pipe dream,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately.
So when you have these clients come in that seem to be kind of low on all three of those important variables, what do you find tends to work generally with the majority of them? Is it trying to increase the effort and keep the volume and frequency relatively low, or are you more keen to let them keep the effort lower and raise the volume and or frequency?
No, if with people who especially have like a pretty good athletic background and have been training for a little bit longer, let's call it like 4 years or so, I always like to start them lower volume, higher effort,
Mm-hmm.
because this is my opinion. I'm not saying it's necessarily correct. You learn something new when you do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
When I give someone like I don't know, what would we say, like a leg press set. Let's talk. We already talked about the leg press. And I'm like, hey, I want this to be like a 1 RIR, and they're going, like rep speed doesn't slow at all. And they rack it. And then like send me that form video. And my response is like, what the fuck was that? Like, it's not
Yeah.
1 RIR. I'm like, that's not even a 3 RIR. Like the rep speed did not slow at all. And then what I'll do is my gut check for them, as I say, next week, you're going to take a spotter on your leg press set and you're going to take it to absolute failure. And I'm very clear. I'm like, if you rack that before they help you, I'm going to be on your ass about it. And last week's 9 rep set turns into like a 16 rep set. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah. So 15 reps is a 1 RAR and you gave me
Right.
9 last week. Like,
Yeah.
and then you put, it's kind of like harsh from me, but they learn immediately. Right. And they
Mm-hmm.
realize that they've been sandbagging for how
Mm-hmm.
long and how much that they have potentially left on the table because of that sandbagging.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's really well put. And that's the approach I take as well, because I think that when you go about thinking about how you want to calibrate your volume, and you can throw frequency in there too as a product of volume, but without taking things to failure at some point, it blurs what your volume tolerance truly is. And I think that by going to failure, you can much more easily calibrate where your volume tolerance is and make the necessary adjustments in that manner. especially for young professionals or professionals in general, people with families, people that are busy, basically anyone normal person that has a normal life. Most of them are going to be benefited by doing less work really, really well and really hard than doing more work, which is going to take more time, more rest periods, more sets, and just a general overall time commitment, which will then cause more stress and issues within their life. And so, yeah, I'm a huge fan of making sure that effort is dialed in, because once we have effort, we can say, wow, 2 sets of that really screwed me up. And therefore, maybe I don't even need more than 2 sets or 1 set or whatever it is. And so if you don't actually go there, you don't actually know. And so, yeah, I think that kind of dovetails into some other kind of thoughts I have. I want to talk about the data-driven volume meta regression that they did. But before I do that, I want to reflect a little bit on this idea of abbreviated training. And I think that this actually relates to kind of our last conversation that you were talking about, because for most of you guys, you may know, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, that when I first started training back when I was 15, 16 years old, I legitimately fell into a online board forum of sorts before Facebook and stuff, the late 90s, where people were training abbreviated. It was legitimately, that was what it was called. It was abbreviated training, or HIT, high intensity training. And the whole idea was that you would basically train 2 to 3 times a week, full body, pick primarily compound movements, do something like 3x5 or 2x8 or something along those lines, basically to failure, close to failure, progressive overload week to week, and just keep kind of rolling from there. And so that was how I started. I basically trained 45 minutes 3 times a week, did that for a number of years, fell off of that approach for almost 20 years. As you guys know, I went through the CrossFit thing and then came out of that into like the higher volume hypertrophy world. And then it's coinciding with my bike adventures, all the cardio that I've been doing. I stumbled back into the abbreviated world about 6 or 7 months ago. And there's now the forum that I was part of back in the day is long gone. That thing doesn't exist anymore. But there's now a Facebook group that has kind of picked up where that forum left. And so I've joined this Facebook group, and it honestly has changed a bit of my perspective on training, because in the evidence-based training world, we're so inundated with volume. Everything is about getting your volume up, training with more volume. If you hit a plateau, more volume. If you're a hard gainer, do more volume. In fact, doing more sets at 2 RIR potentially is better than doing less sets to failure, because volume. And then I go into this abbreviated training group, and so many of the guys that were there in the late 90s when I was first in that group are still part of this group. And they're various ages. Like some of those guys were in their early 20s back in the late 90s, and now they're, 5 or 10 years older than me. Some of the guys are in their 60s or 70s and still doing this thing because they were, 40 back in the late 90s, or 35 or something like that. And I'm struggling a little bit to say that, these guys need to train this way because they are, quote, hard gainers. Like there's this idea that if you're a hard gainer in this abbreviated training model, you need to do less volume and work harder, which is in direct contrast to the research, which says if you're a hard gainer, you need to do more effort or more volume. And so I've been really struggling to piece this back together. But one of the things that I've really enjoyed is seeing that these guys have been training this way now for 30 years. I mean, all late 90s to current, these guys have not deviated from this training approach. And these guys are huge and strong, and it's extremely impressive. And so I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, are they a specific type of person, somatotype, etc., that somehow thrives with this style of training more than they would with a different style of training? Or is this ubiquitously potentially a training style that if more people embarked on and more people stuck with really big mover compound movements close to failure, consistently using progressive overload for years and years and years and years, maybe that is like the most simplest streamlined approach for somebody that can't commit their life to training and recovery and all these other elements that go into that. What are your thoughts?
I think there is probably a right answer, you know, I think, but I do think it's probably a person. I think it's like one of those things. I think there is like an object true answer, right? Across a population of people. But I also think I think that is the best answer, right? And what I just said. But I also think there's like also correct answers that are probably more fitting to the personality types and those sorts of things that are still right, but maybe not as right as, X.
Okay.
Like what's a really good example here? Alex Hormozy talks a lot about this, right? And I know you had a note in here about morning routines, which I think this is great. And he's like notorious for like kind of bashing on people's like morning routines and stuff. When people ask him, "Oh, what's your morning routine?" He's like, "I get up, I have some coffee, I might have a little bit of nicotine, I put my noise canceling headphones on, and I fucking work." And he's like, "I don't care about my mood or my mindset or the alignment of the planets or if Mercury's in retrograde. Like, I have my coffee and I fucking work. Like, that's my morning routine." I think that is the best answer. However, for a lot of people, they might find that life is not worth living if that is how they have to do it, sort of thing. You know what I mean? So I think that's where like the personality types, there's a best answer, but then there's a still correct answer, but is more fitting for different people, different enjoyment levels and stuff. Like, for example, if let's say full body training is objectively the best way to do it, you pick a back exercise, you pick a leg exercise, you pick I think I said back, chest, maybe arm or something like that. Let's say that is best. You do that 4 days per week. That is, some new research comes out. It's undeniable. Like that is best. I would struggle transitioning to that because I strongly dislike training in that way. And that might be one of those things where I was like, I might try it. I'm like, fuck, dude, this is best now. Everyone's saying it's best. We have great research. Like we know it's best now. But I would just really begin to enjoy my training a lot less,
Yeah.
So that's like one of those things where I think there's the best answer, but multiple answers that are still pretty close to the best.
I think abbreviated training doesn't have to be perceived as being full body sessions 2 to 3 times a week or whatever it is. Like there's guys in the abbreviated group that are using a PPL in an abbreviated fashion, just doing like lower volumes with that and, everything to failure. I recently switched to an upper lower. I'm not sure if I've talked about this much on the podcast, but I was doing my 2 times a week full body throughout the entire bike season. And then just about 2 weeks ago, I redesigned my program to go upper, lower, upper, lower, upper, lower. So 6 sessions over 2 weeks with 3 sessions a week. And 2 reasons for that. One, because I was kind of burning out on the full body, to your point. I think that that's inevitable at some point along the way. But second, because it's now winter season and I'm going to be doing less biking, I wanted to get 1 extra lift session in there so that I can get an extra day of fitness that doesn't depend on me having to breathe really heavy and do some sort of cardio adventure. So I do think abbreviated training can be different things. It doesn't have to be full body if that doesn't fit your personality type. But I guess my argument for, if I'm going to just play devil's advocate here for a second and say that, so let's say abbreviated training is the best for everybody, or let's say it's the best for 99% of people. And if you're in the 1% where you want to 100% optimize your hypertrophy and potentially be a competitive bodybuilder, maybe you're not in this 99%, but for the sake of argument, let's just say 99% of people would be best with some sort of abbreviated training program because it primarily focuses in the strength-ish rep ranges. So I'm not going to say you're doing sets of 1 to 4 because now we're not even really talking about hypertrophy. So we're staying in that like 5 to 8, 5 to 10 rep range. Things are going to failure. We're using big compound movements that are stimulating multiple muscle groups. And we're kind of, I don't want to use the word forcing progressive overload over time, but there's a big part of abbreviated training that is obsessed with the concept of microloading, taking, 1 pound or 1% of your lift. If it's 100 pounds on the bar, maybe you add 1 pound. If it's 300 pounds on the bar, maybe you add 3 pounds or whatever, but keeping it 1% or less. and progressing with that over time, over and over and over and over, and just keep showing up. And so in theory, if you had somebody that just put their head down, stopped routine hopping, just committed to 6 to 10 basic movements that they just did over and over and added weight, you look at this person when they first start, and then you look at this person 10 years later, and all they've done is focus on these movements trying to add load, and they look entirely different than they did 10 years earlier because they've gotten stronger. And I think that that's one of the pieces of abbreviated training that I love, is noting that, hey, if you're not adding weight to the bar over time and doing something to demonstrate progression, then you're likely not progressing. I mean, if you're not gaining strength in some capacity, you're likely also not adding muscle. And this is even more true in the earlier stages of training. When you're like at our stage, we can get better at performing movements. We can create a better stimulus. There's a number of things we can do to potentially build muscle without continuing to gain strength. But I guess my argument would just be that if 99% of people committed to 6 to 10 compound lifts and progressively overloaded those for years, that person would likely end up at a really solid place that they're really happy with at that point, 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
I would agree with that. Now, here is where I think we run into issues. And this is one of the other notes I had down there. There's a lot of noise in this space, right? And especially now more than ever with social media and everyone trying to make a name for themselves and produce content and that sort of thing. That approach, I would say in this day and age, takes conviction, because you're like, hey, I know this is the right way. I'm going to do it for 10 years and I'm going to work this system and get what I need out of it. 30 years ago, you might have like one muscle magazine, right? Or you might just have that like uncle that's like, no, this is how you do it. And your uncle's 6'2", 250 pounds. You're like, yeah, I'm going to fucking listen. But now we have all these like different birds and all these different opinions and stuff. And there's so much noise, and it would be significantly harder to just block out all of that noise for a decade and just be convicted in your approach. Like, I think that is very, very challenging. Even so much like myself, for example, this is a really, really good example. I just yesterday started testing the RP hypertrophy app. I wouldn't say that like I think it's revolutionary or whatever, but sometimes I like to like eat the dog food a little bit. There's things like, for example, I don't think it's the best way. That is my current opinion. I'm going to spend some of my own money to hopefully prove myself right. Win-win. I lose $35 and I have a further reinforcement of, my own existing beliefs. That's, I guess, worst case scenario. Best case scenario is like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I make incredible progress, or something like that. And I'm like, holy shit, I've been wrong this whole time. There is a better way. It's a win regardless. It's a win or learn sort of thing. So like I'm in that right now. What I did was just took my existing program into it, and then I'm going to let it, auto adjust the volumes and however it progresses. I don't even really know, to be completely honest.
Interesting. That was actually going to be my question. That's cool that you enter your own program and then it kind of AIs you from there.
I don't think it's necessarily an AI. I think they have like we could call it like an algorithm that they built into it. Because after you complete a body part, after you complete each exercise, actually, it asks you joint pain, no joint pain, minor, moderate, like bad problem. After each exercise, after each section, let's say I have like 3 back exercise, it's going to say, what was your back stimulus? Or back pump, I think it asks for. None, minor, moderate, like massive pump. And then it also asks about like, how do you perceive the amount of work that you did? Barely, easy day, moderate, pushed my limits a little bit, or like way too much. And then I think based off of your ratings, and I think you'll give a little like a pre-training assessment of how your soreness is and stuff and certain things. It will regulate things based off the algorithm that they but I'm interested to see. I've heard it might just like to keep throwing sets at you, which
right.
we know is probably not the best way. From an overarching thing, I think if you want my personal opinion, which again, this is only my opinion. I think that you can use that contextually to potentially break through plateaus, but then you have to pull it back and probably deload and then, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, and that's literally definition of auto-regulation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool that
Yeah.
you're experimenting with that. I think myself and the listeners are going to be keen on kind of hearing how that progresses as it goes. But I also relate to the noise piece, and program hopping was a major problem of mine back in my early days. Like I say, my first 5 to 6 years training, I would commit to something and think this was the way for, 3 to 6 months. And then I'd be like, oh, new shiny object, new movement I want to try, new split routine that's supposed to be better, like whatever. It's just like there's so much out there, and there's so many people with great physiques that are promoting these things, which takes you back to this idea that, like, in many ways, like, a lot of things work. And basing it on your personality type is important, basing it on your individual stress recovery ability, all the life circumstances that go into that whole pie. But there are a lot of things that work. And so fitting it into your life is potentially one of the most important, which again, I think takes me back to that abbreviated training model, which is that unless you're pushing the limits of trying to be the top 1%, working out for 45 to 60 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week, and forcing progressive overload is a really kind of removed way, maybe somewhat removed way of having to go about your training. Like, you don't have to sit there and think about it and overanalyze it and scroll Instagram looking for new workout programs and like all of this stuff. I mean, if you're a busy professional with a family and kids and all of that, and you just want to show up to the gym and work out, like, don't get distracted by all the shiny objects. Don't worry about the noise out there, because you can just have blinders on and just focus on your training and getting stronger over time, and like, shit's going to work out for you. And so, man, that's a lesson reflecting, 25 years in the past, looking at my earlier self. But I do think that there's a lot of value in that approach, especially for people that are part of that 99% and not part of the 1%.
Yeah. I think that the key that you alluded to, but I think I think it's worth us driving home is, I don't want to say forcing the progressions, because I think people get a little bit greedy, but like progressive overload. And what that means, like, you're going to have to work hard at that.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, you typically have like choosing exercises that you like and work well. Typically people don't have a hard time like really challenging and pushing themselves at exercises that fit you well and you like to use
And feel good. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's much harder for me to want to push close to failure or work hard on something where I'm like, yeah, like, I'm getting a stimulus, but like my elbow or my shoulder feels weird while I'm doing this. And like, I don't know, that exercise just doesn't fit me, and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, all of that's good stuff. So let's transition to briefly discuss this data-driven meta-regression on volume. Have you seen any of this? Have you looked into it at all?
No.
All right, cool.
The shitty thing with being over here in Asia is Instagram really does tailor my algorithm to like my Australian friends, people, and also there's so much of things I just don't see anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this meta regression is in preprint right now, so it's not officially out there as like a document yet. I mean, people look at the preprint stuff and assume that it's reality, when likely it's going to go back, have a few edits, come back out, and overall probably look similar, but maybe not exactly the same. So these guys, man, Zach and Josh and that team over there are just so nuanced and contextual. And I have so much love for their involvement in the space. Because, like, as just an overriding example, this meta regression they put out, it analyzed volume and frequency for hypertrophy and strength. And they spent 5 hours on a podcast, 5 hours, one episode of a podcast, discussing the volume ramifications of this study. And then they put out another one that was like 3 hours discussing the frequency ramifications of the study. And so, not to bury the lead here, the result of the volume meta-regression was that there is no cap to volume. Essentially, they found that the best fit line, we always assumed it was an upside down U-shaped curve, meaning that you get more results as the volume increases, but then at some point the volume is too much and you start getting worse results because you're doing too much and you're not recovering. Their best fit line was a linear model, meaning the more volume you did, you just kept getting better results. And I obviously don't agree with that, but I listened to the majority of their 5-hour podcast, and the first 4 hours of the 5 hours was them essentially casing all of their concerns with the meta and why it potentially isn't representing exactly what the line is shown to represent. So literally they spent 4 hours trying to talk us out of why their model is the right model, which I love. It's amazing. And then they went into like the practical applications of implementation and all of that. And then when you talk about all of the real life concerns that we've been discussing as far as the practical considerations, how it fits around your life, the various aspects of recovery, including like nutrition, sleep, stress, all of that buckets, training motivation, ability to do this long-term over time. I mean, there were so many points that they made that by the end of the podcast, you really would have thought that they were advocating for like a moderate volume training approach, you know? And so I just going back, I just love that they do that, because so many people look at you talk about the noise. So many people look at the main graphic and it says something like volume never peaks. The best fit line is linear growth and blah, blah, blah. And you look at that and you're like, yeah, I need to be doing 50 sets or whatever. But really in reality, that's not the case. And so I just appreciate what they do. And I think that for anybody that sees these really blasphemous headlines that seem outrageous, I encourage you to dig in, potentially listen to the podcast, or at least read some of the content they put out on Instagram or on YouTube, and get like a potentially better understanding of exactly what you're seeing.
Yeah, I like when I do see stuff from them, I'm like, oh wow, it's like what are they up to? And it's always just so damn good, you know. Like it's just and like I don't know, as a professional, you can just appreciate quality work, but like what they do is so good.
Yeah. And then just to wrap a bow on that, they basically found that for frequency, as far as it relates to frequency, that frequency didn't seem to make a huge difference in hypertrophy, which I don't think is novel information. And they did find that frequency had quite an impact on strength, which again, I think fits the bill, because strength is a skill. And the more that you practice it, the better you're going to get at it. Which also, like, it just makes me bring back to this abbreviated training thing one more time, because the abbreviated training model focuses so much on this strength progression and this progressive overload over time. And there's definitely some blurry lines between, like, in the abbreviated world in that manner, because their idea, and I'm putting, not to put words in everyone's mouth here, but I guess my perception of the methodology is that if you get stronger over time, you get bigger, and therefore you achieve hypertrophy. So they're using strength as the proxy there. And I think that oftentimes outside of the abbreviated training world, progress isn't measured by how much strength you make over time, but sometimes in how much volume you're doing over time and how sore you're getting over time, which is then being used as like a proxy for stimulus. And so, yeah, I just, at some level you have to get stronger, but I'm still, I have trepidation as far as how much the focus should be purely on strength. Because if the focus was to be put squarely on strength, there's probably better ways to go about it than doing 3x5 to failure, which it leads me to another point, which is that if strength is best accrued with higher frequencies further from failure, but hypertrophy is best accrued closer to failure, then how do we kind of square that circle of the abbreviated approach being 3x5 or 2x8 to failure, with strength being the primary objective? Like, I wonder if you're basing this whole thing on strength progression, would that person not be better off doing 5x5 at an 8 RM or 3x5 and an 8RM and doing that 2 or 3 times a week so that now you're getting more frequency and you're getting more practice in the movements. You're not hitting failure. Maybe your strength goes up faster. What's the downstream effect then on the accruement of lean body mass by taking that approach versus by going to failure? So I'm talking in circles here, but these are kind of the things going through my brain, trying to square the circle of failure and volume and frequency and all of these things.
Yeah. It's like the disheartening, I don't want to say fact because that makes it sound like what I'm going to say is absolute, and that's not. It seems like the more information that we get on this, it helps, but we still don't have like definitive, right? Or what we get is, in this context, is like information that is probably pretty accurate, but practically not unacceptable, but like practically unimplementable sort of thing. Like the volume.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, that like more volume's better, but like where does it stop? Can you train 4 hours every single day? And the hard thing is like at the end of last year, I was training for 3 hours a day, 4 to 5 times per week. I was natural and in the end of my calorie deficit. At the end of it, I wasn't getting sore anymore. And my performance really didn't drop off to the end. But, the time commitment, it did become too much. It was not fun anymore, right? But it's like, where do you stop and put that line? And then how do you kind of ramp that up? And it's convoluted. I do think it's quite convoluted.
Yeah, I agree. And just so one last thing to reference a study on this topic. Essentially what they did is it was a while ago, it was a few years ago. They took 2 groups, and one group did 4 sets of 10 to failure. So we're talking hypertrophy type programming, hypertrophy rep range, sets to failure. The other group also used their 10 rep max, but they did 8 sets of 5. So both groups got 40 total reps in. One went 4 sets of 10 to failure. The other one went 8 sets of 5, assuming 5 RIR on each set, 4 RIR, something like that. And at the end of the study, they found that the 4x10 group got better hypertrophy and the 8x5 group built better strength. Which it continues to just blur this discussion of like, well, if building strength ultimately leads to more hypertrophy, like, would we have seen that if this study continued in this manner over years? Would we have seen the 8x5 approach actually outpace the 4x10 in hypertrophy as well? Or is there something really specific about going to failure that seems to be unique and beneficial for hypertrophy? And so I just thought that was an interesting representation of that.
I think if you want my honest answer, I think it's probably lies somewhere in better definement of the terms strength and hypertrophy, right? And what I think might be like a decent example is like increasing strength at I hate to say this because there is no like hypertrophy rep range, but like overtime strength at 8 reps, something like that. Something that's a little bit more asterisks in its definition. But again, it gets convoluted.
For sure. Yeah, it's very complicated. Okay. So we probably have 1 or 2 more things we can talk about here. Do you want to quickly go into morning routines? I'm actually curious what you do when you wake up in the morning.
I would say I err a little bit more on the side of the Alex Hormozy approach. Mine really depends on like motivation. In full transparency, I am in a lower motivation cycle of my life. There are things that I want to do from a creative standpoint that I know are not the most monetarily rewarding. For example, I've had numerous people ask me, like, Aaron, when is No Man's Land 2 going to release? Like, I literally had someone tell me they've run the program like 4 times. Like,
That's awesome.
Like, believe me, I really want to get you guys a second program, right? But realistically, I'll make maybe $600 off the program, something like that, So for me, I'm like, it's a lot of work, and I like to do things like in a very good way. I'm going to pay a designer to design it and all these things, but to make like $600, like,
Yeah.
I'll just sign another client, and
Right.
it's a lot easier. It's a lot less time investment, so that's where I'm finding myself. But there's times where I'm super motivated and I just want to get these things out. And I'm just in like a low motivation cycle. I think a lot of the gym stuff has me a little bit burned out, just like getting my
Mm-hmm.
ass kicked on things, and my pure joy is I would say is not there in certain aspects. So it depends on the day. For
Mm-hmm.
example, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I don't care how crappy I feel. I'm up, coffee, I put my smile on, and I show up for my clients, right? But then there's sometimes where like Friday rolls around, I might not have anything that needs to get done. And I might just kind of fuck around and waste the day if I'm really being honest. And I hate it. I hate myself for that. But that does happen sometimes. Um, and I've just found that like, sometimes what I will do is I'll try and have some coffee in the sunshine. That's like a little thing. Um, but it's raining a lot now in the mornings and
Yeah.
stuff, and it's kind of overcast. But I've used some, but nothing that's ever like really really stuck. And sometimes in those mornings, like, kind of just want to work, and
Mm-hmm.
like, for example, there was 2 days, like Monday, Tuesday last week when I was in Pennsylvania, I was waking up before 5 a.m. So I'm like, all right, I'm up. The Starbucks was already open. It was like right around the corner. So I just like got in the car, went to Starbucks at 5 a.m., got my coffee, and like came home and started check-ins. Um, but yeah, I can't really say I have one. I wish I had more there, but I've never found anything that truly stuck over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I feel that. I think mine's pretty simple as well. I mean, when you look at the whole slew of different things you could be doing in the morning, when you look at Huberman or those guys and learn about, all the plethora of things that you should be doing, I've kind of narrowed it down to the things that I think fit my life and move the needle the most without causing me to have like, I don't want to say anxiety in the morning, but like if I had to wake up and do a cold dunk in the morning, I don't think that would be the best way for me to begin my day. I prefer to begin it maybe with a little bit more calm and a little less adrenaline. And so I wake up never to an alarm except potentially on this morning when we do podcasts. My alarm goes off at 5:11 on these days, and usually today, like I was up before my alarm. I woke up at 5:02, and so that's the best when you're able to wake up before an alarm, wake up naturally, lay in bed for a couple minutes, kind of just let the mind wake up slowly. I love doing that, kind of focusing on my breathing a little bit in bed for a few minutes. And then I guess it's lucky, but the moment that I step out of bed, like the moment my foot hits the ground, my body is like, oh, time to go to the toilet. And so immediately upon stepping out of bed, I go and I do my morning toilet thing, wash my face, do all that stuff. And then the first thing I do is walk into my office, put my heart rate monitor strap on, get in this outfit that I'm wearing right now, which is like a double hoodie with a beanie because it's really cold in the morning, and sit down on my couch with the heart rate monitor on. And I do a 2.5 minute guided, I don't want to call it guided. It's a elite HRV app. So basically it kind of breathe in, breathe out, keep the breathing slow and controlled. I try to maintain 4 breaths a minute. So one breath every 15 seconds, usually about 5 seconds in, 10 seconds out. Do that for 2.5 minutes. Then take a minute or two break, do a little bit more breathing, and then do a longer, more focused session where my eyes are closed. I'm trying to not think about anything, but just kind of let my mind be at the same time, focusing on, what the sound of the breathe in, the breathe out, trying to breathe as deeply as I can, but also as shallow is the wrong word, but this idea that if you had a candle flame underneath your nose, that you wouldn't blow the candle flame out. So being able to breathe deeply, but also shallow is the wrong word. I can't think of the word that I want, but basically breathing in a manner to not put that hypothetical flame out. And then I just feel this sense of calm rush over me after I've done that, say, 10 minutes of breathing there. And that is more or less the end of like the routine as it happens from bed to couch. The second part of the routine would just be that once it gets light out, I like to go outside and try to get some light movement in while looking up at the sky. So if I have the opportunity to go for a walk for 10 minutes, I'll do that. Sometimes I'll go outside if it's nice out and I'll stretch in the sunlight. Maybe do like some air squats or something along those lines just to kind of get the body loose. And yeah, some of that might need to change as the weather changes as well, but it's pretty simple. It's not super involved. I just think it's important for me, the two main things are focusing on my breathing to bring me to kind of a center, calm place to start the day, and then just to get some sunlight in the morning or some light in general. And those are kind of the two big movers for me. And then at some point in the morning, I do like to get more structured movement, whether that's my cardio for the day or lifting or a longer walk or something along those lines.
I do like the breathing idea. That's something that I should probably incorporate. There was a point where I was doing like, I wouldn't really call it like I guess like maybe like a mental kind of journal where I would just like sit down, do some simple breathing, like completely unstructured, and just kind of think about like the things that I wanted to get done, like who I wanted to be that day, like how I wanted to approach my situations in the day. And that really helped because it was like being intentional around getting into the day as opposed to just like getting up and letting the day come to me. It was kind of like finding myself first. And what probably happened is I traveled or something like that and was off my schedule and then never started it again. Right. That's probably realistically what happened.
Do you ever do any journaling or written self-reflection when you have moments of struggle, like moments of anxiety, of pressure, of clients annoying you, of, I don't know, struggles with Jenny, like whatever it is that could be bothering you for the day? Do you ever put those into words, or do you just kind of reflect on them in your?
There are times I go through little like batches of journaling, and I would say the main thing I hate about journaling is I write so infrequently with like a pen or a paper. It's like, it's kind of challenging to do. And I like, my writing's awful. And it's like, I mess it up a lot. Like I just don't like writing anymore because we just never do it, But no, I do find that beneficial as well, but it's really just if I'm actually going to like commit to it. But I do like, it's kind of just like centering thoughts, like finding a way to like center thoughts in the morning and give myself a little bit more intention, or to really just spend a little bit of time with myself thinking around the things that are important or that I want to make important for that day. I do find really positively improves the trajectory of my day. And what I can say with absolute confidence and conviction, like let's call it maybe a Friday or a Saturday, a Sunday, the days that I don't have like any real work in the morning, if I like just lay in bed and I'm on my phone, or like I get up and I like go out under the couch or whatever, and I just like open up my phone, see what's on like Twitter or Instagram, those days are by far my worst days. Worst mood, worst motivation. Like it is staggering the difference.
Yeah. I've actually been considering moving my phone out of my bedroom because Kim and I both, like, our first inclination upon waking up is pick the phone up. And like, even if I'm not looking at it in a way where it would cause stress, like pulling up an Instagram or looking at my email or something like that, like usually what I do is I just open it and I look at my sleep, and then I look at what podcasts were there for me to download. So those are kind of like non-stressful things, but still, I don't love the idea of just like being in bed and immediately reaching for my phone and looking at it to be like, how did I sleep? Like, I think I slept well. What did my app say? So yeah, I think there's certainly value in potentially leaving the phone outside of the room. I personally would love to go through 45 minutes in the morning and not look at my phone, but everything is fucking tied to my phone. Like if I want to do my HRV breathing in the morning, it's on my phone. And so like, I haven't quite figured out the way around that without, suddenly just abolishing my data. And I have 265 days of a streak right now on my HRV. So like, I can't do a day of HRV. I got to keep the streak
Yeah.
going. Okay, well, that's pretty much all I have for today. We had a couple other meandering topics to discuss that we didn't get to, which is totally fine. But I love this structure of episode. I love that we can just kind of free flow and take the conversation where we want. I can dig in a bit to your training. I can talk about some of the aspects on my mind about my training and the training of our clients and stuff like that. So I personally love this episode. I think there's value in it. Like we talked about, I don't know if this is going to be the most popular episode with our subscribers. But I think it's got value, and I think next week we'll come back with a November Q&A.
Yeah, sounds good. For any listeners out there, leave your thoughts on the episode. For Bryan and I, a little bit of feedback always helps us to tailor things. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, that's perfectly fine, as long as you use non awful terminology. That's perfectly fine to be critical as well. It's all in how you say things. And let us know. So as always, thank you. And like Bryan said, we'll be back next week with the November Instagram Q&A.